This is Ezra chapter 4 verses 1 to 5. Opposition to the rebuilding. There are some tricky words in it, so apologies if anyone knows how to say some of these better than I do. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the families and said, "Let us help you build, because like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the families of Israel answered, "You have no part with us in building a temple to our God. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us." Then the peoples around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. They bribed officials to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
So sadly, we lost the feed again. We're not quite sure what's going on, but we will sort it out this week, I'm sure. So we're just dipping in again to the service to bring you the start of the sermon, and then we'll rejoin the service for the rest of it. We've just heard the reading from Ezra, only heard, not seen. I know that was a problem. But as we think about that reading, I want to tell you a bit of a story. There are a number of stories, I'm sure, that you could tell of things that have happened to you over the last weeks and months with all the different changes and things. But here's one. 2 weeks ago, I was lying on the floor of the church, on my back, under one of those middle pews by the middle pillar, in desperation and despair. I just managed to fix the second camera to the wall, which we think are working well, but we're not quite sure why they're dropping out. But I'd done that, and then I started laying the cable. I started tacking it from the back sound desk all the way round the walls, all the way round the church, under the Saxon stone, through the holes in the pew legs underneath for cables, round the outside, threading it past pipes and heaters, and until we got to the pew platforms, and then sliding on my back under one of the pews. I was tacking the cable every 30 centimeters or so, until getting to the crucial part where if the last cable tack didn't hold, then all of the last ones on that section would fall out. I was balancing on my side on my back, holding the cable with one foot, holding the hammer with the other hand, and reaching down into my pocket with the left hand for a cable tack. And it was empty. I'd completely run out of cable tacks. Now, my first thought whilst balancing like this was to try and nudge my phone out of the pocket and ask Google to call my wife and ask her to nip to Wickes to get some more cable tacks. But I'm not sure she would have appreciated that. So I had to down tools, abandon everything, and go to the hardware shop myself. And again, you'll know the frustration if you've ever needed to stop a job halfway through. If you do DIY, it can get really frustrating. And actually, there are loads of things that frustrate us in life, aren't there? Running out of things is certainly one of them, but there are loads of things that get in the way of our plans and frustrate our plans. Running out of time, needing something that you haven't got, forgetting something. And of course, it's not just things, but it's also people, isn't it? People can so easily frustrate our plans or things we're trying to do. Mostly by accident, but actually sometimes deliberately as well. You get to that point where whatever it is that you're trying to do, whatever it is you're trying to achieve, we get to that point where we feel that everything is working against us. Everyone is trying to prevent us from achieving our plan, achieving our goal. We know that feeling, don't we? And it's debilitating. And actually, God's people knew that feeling. We heard it in the chapter of Ezra that Mark just read us the start of. They knew that feeling of frustration when something doesn't go to plan. And now we're going to hand back over to the church. 2 weeks, we've been back in the building and looking at the book of Ezra. And remember, God's people were in exile in Babylon and had been for years, and then the king of Babylon, Belshazzar, is overthrown. You remember the writing on the wall and the big party. And then Cyrus, the king of Persia, takes over, and he issues this big decree that we talked about that says God's people can go back to their homes and go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their lives and particularly rebuild the temple. And they do. They return home. And they first rebuild the temple altar, the spiritual foundation, so that they can make sacrifices to God to bring them back into relationship with God. And last week we celebrated, didn't we, that Jesus is the once for all time sacrifice for us to bring us back to God. And then after they build those spiritual foundations in the altar, they start building the physical foundations of the temple. And this is how chapter 3 ends. All of the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. Many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation stone being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one, it says, could distinguish the shouts of joy from the weeping because the people made so much noise and the sound was heard far away. And we think they've made it. They've got there. That weeping for the desecration of the first temple and for all those years spent in exile, away from their home, away from their God, now turns to tears and shouts of joy as they've made it back and that foundation stone is laid. Now there should be a big party and the credits should roll and the triumphant music plays out. The victorious story of Ezra. But of course, Ezra hasn't actually arrived in the story yet. So we're not at the end yet. So what happens? Well, chapter 4 shows the start of the next day. And straight away, things don't go to plan. Chapter 4, verse 1 says, when the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard the exiles were building the temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the families and said, let us help you. Because like you, we seek your God. We've been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. Let us get involved. Let us help. And we think, oh, that's nice, neighborly. They're offering to help build this temple. But of course, the clue's in how they're described, isn't it? The enemies of Judah and Benjamin. Remember how history works. It's written down after the thing happens. And so when we're told that the enemies of Judah and Benjamin offer to help, we kind of know that there's something coming that marks them out as the enemies. They're not people to help here, are they? They're trying to divert. They're the people that the Jews were scared of, that we talked about last week when they started to build. And at first they try and do it by joining in, doing it from the inside, diverting the focus maybe. But they're told, no, we were commanded to build the temple by Cyrus for our God, and so it's fine, we'll do it. And at this point, the enemies show their true colors, don't they? Verse 4 says, then the peoples around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. And they bribed officials to work against them and frustrate their plans. Now wait, this is not a little setback here. This isn't kind of just the Jews saying, oh, we've run out of cable tax for the temple cameras. We've got to go to the big wicks in Jerusalem. So that's really annoying, that's frustrating. No, their plans, we're told, were frustrated by their enemies for the entire reign of Cyrus and into Darius, the king's next reign. That's 15 years. This plan was frustrated and put off. That's a long trip to Wicks, even for me. And the rest of chapter 4 goes on, and we're told the enemies write a letter of complaint to the king at the time. This is even before King Darius. This is in between. And they write a letter, and they say, as king, we thought you should know that these people have come in and are now rebuilding that wicked and rebellious city, we're told. That's what they say. Just thought you should know, as king, we're just doing our civic duty. And the king replies in a letter, issue a decree to order these men to stop work on the city till we can find out what's going on. And then chapter 5, there's another letter to the new king, King Darius, and it's the same people. Dear king, just thought we'd let you know, as king, just because we're responsible citizens, that we went and asked these people, who authorized you to build the temple? And they said, we are servants of God, of heaven and earth, and King Cyrus issued the decree. And king, that's not you, that's the last king. You didn't sanction this. Again, we're just reporting it, just so you know, as king. And Ezra 4 and 5 descends into this 15-year saga of a building regulations battle between the locals and the newcomers, who were actually the original locals anyway. And if anything makes the Bible more relatable, then it's something like this, isn't it? I mean, we see this kind of thing in Hove all the time. If you've read any of the comments on any of the building proposals over the last 10 years that the Argus have reported on, you'll see people arguing back and forth. I mean, we've only just got over the saga of the cycle lanes. People arguing back and forth over different things, frustrating plans because they're for it or because they're against it. But we see these frustrations in life as well, don't we? Why can't things just be simple? Have you ever found yourself saying, why can't everyone just agree with me? That would be so much more simple. We see it in the church as well. We're told in the Bible there will be things that get in the way of church ministry. There will be setbacks. There will be people who want to stand in the way of the gospel and stop that message being spread. And so this battle of letters of complaint rages for 15 years. And all the while, God's people wait. And they down tools, and they stop rebuilding the temple, and they wait. But chapter 5, verse 5 has something that we need to know. We don't know whether they knew this at the time. Well, I'm sure they knew it, but we don't know whether they felt it, whether they remembered it. We don't know, but we're treated to this little glimpse of light. In chapter 5, verse 5, it says this, but the eye of their God was watching over them. We need to know that, don't we? That the eye of our God is watching over us. And yes, it sounds like the eye of Sauron, if you're a Tolkien fan, but this isn't some kind of greedy eye of some tyrant god watching over his people to make sure they still build the temple that he deserves all the glory from. I mean, he does. He deserves all of the glory forever. But no, this is a God whose eyes are fixed on his people like a parent's eyes watching their child go through the school gates for the first time. As if keeping your gaze fixed on them can surround them by kind of a supernatural bubble of love that will get them through the school day until pick up. And of course, while we lose sight of our kids as they go into school and I'm sure have a great time each day, God's loving father-like gaze stays on us, as it did as he watched over the returned exiles. When our plans seem to be collapsing, when we can't see a way through what we're going through, when every door we push or every path we try and go down seems to be blocked or frustrated or fraught with problems, we need to know that the eyes of our Father are on us. Not judging, not testing, but fixed on us with love. And while from our perspective, things can look insurmountable and that there's no way through, God sees the whole plan, doesn't he? We see that in Ezra. These letters are going back and forth and they seem to be such a frustration to the temple building plans. But one little line in the last letter to King Darius changes everything. The enemies are trying to frustrate these plans and they try and say to Darius, God's people said it was Cyrus, the last king, who issued this decree. You're not going to let him tell you what to do, are you? You're in charge now, Darius. But King Darius thinks, Oh, you just told me who issued the decree. We better go and look it up. He likes to do things by the book. And here's my favorite part in the whole of the book of Ezra, chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. King Darius then issued an order, because we said he likes to do things by the book, and to search the archives for the archives stored in the treasury at Babylon for the decree. They don't find anything at first, so they keep searching wider and wider until we get to verse 2. A scroll was found in the citadel at Ecbatana, in the province of Media, which detailed the whole decree of Cyrus. Why is that my favorite bit in the whole book? Because with a little bit of research, you find out that apparently this Ecbatana was the summer residence for Persian kings. It was their summer vacation spot. You can just imagine King Cyrus, can't you? Just overthrown Babylon 15 years earlier, just issued a decree for God's people to return and build the temple. I deserve a bit of a holiday. Off to Ecbatana, off to the holiday spot. He's unpacking his suitcase in the villa by the pool, pulling on his swimming stuff. He's ready to go out, and he realizes he's still got this decree that he's just signed. Shoves it down on a table or something like that. It ends up in the bottom of the summer vacation filing cabinet. And all those years later, this decree is finally found, turns up at the summer holiday home. And even better, not only does it show that the decree is by royal decree and that the people can go on building the temple, it reminds them of something that they'd forgotten. That actually, in the decree, the locals were meant to pay for the temple rebuilding. God's eyes were on the situation. His gaze was fixed on his people, working everything for good. And come the end of chapter 6 of Ezra, work restarts. And on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, we're told, in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius, the temple was completed. And the people share the Passover meal. And so what about us? Well, we can see the end of their story, can't we? We're still only halfway through Ezra, or just over halfway through, but we could read to the end. We could see what happens. We can see the twists and turns of the plot as it thickens and goes this way and that. We can see them happening as we read, and we can read how it ends. We have that God's eye view of their story, because we can't see our whole story. No, we have to live that. Just like they had to live theirs. But as we live out our story, with all these frustrations that happen, we live it knowing that we know the one who can see the whole thing. The one whose eye is watching us step by step. In a moment in the service, we're going to celebrate communion. And as we do, we'll be celebrating what the enemies of God thought was the ultimate win, the ultimate frustration of God's salvation plan for the world. As Jesus died on the cross, evil celebrated. But so do we, because we know what comes next. And through his death and his resurrection, we are brought into his salvation plan for the world. And that becomes the story that we live out. And yes, sometimes it will feel like there's no way through what we're going through. Sometimes it will feel like everything or everyone is working against us. But just like in Ezra, our Father's eyes are fixed on his people. And he will finish the good work in us. And so we're going to turn that truth into prayer. And as we pray, we're going to listen to another song, a song that we're turning into our prayer, that as we go through these frustrations, our God, his eyes are on us, and he will hold us fast. So let's listen and praise.